So I will start by introducing myself. My name is Emilie Sitzia. I'm a professor at the University of Amsterdam, where I work on word and image. And I'm also an associate professor at the University of Maastricht, where I work on museology. So I have this strange profile that I've been studying literature, art history, and museology, and doing all of that together. So that's why I'm really excited to be here. You can imagine that this is like my dreamland. There's people that are interested in the same stuff as me. So I work on book exhibition both as an art historian, because I love the beautiful illustrated book, but also as a museologist, looking at audience impact and things like that. So I always kind of go back and forth between this kind of fascination for the object and fascination for the audience. So that's kind of like what I wanted to talk to you about today, really about engaging audiences otherwise, because what I see, what I would like us to think about today is the way we exhibit book and how we engage audiences with the books and library exhibition. And I would really like us to let go of what I've come to call the glass coffin. I have seen many book exhibitions over the years, and the default exhibition mode is always the book in the glass coffin. And it does something to the book that is actually very damaging in terms of audience relationship. So we'd like us to try and see how we can, okay, maybe have the book in the glass case because we need to for conservation, but what can we do around that to try and engage audiences otherwise? So, and I would really like us to think today about aligning audience impact goals, what we want for our audience to feel, to think, yeah, maybe we want them to laugh, maybe we want them to fall in love, maybe we want them to cry. I don't know what we want from audiences, but we need to align that with curatorial strategies, which I think often is not always thought through completely, also because of very practical matters, and we're going to come back to that later. So today I'll do my talk in 3 parts. The first one will be thinking with you about the interdisciplinary nature of book exhibitions. The second one will be more about audience effects. And the third part will be looking at 3 specific curatorial strategies that I think are particularly efficient for book exhibitions, which is affective curation, participatory curation, and transformative curation. And don't worry, big words, we will talk about it, explain them thoroughly. So, as a starting point, and I probably should have asked how to drive that before I started. Yes, it's working. As a starting point, I want us to think about the changing role of cultural institution. Clover, I think, puts it really well. She says that public art galleries and museums do take sides. So whether we like it or not, we are taking sides. And there is a new set of expectation, both from the founders, from the public, and a sense of social responsibility that we have today that maybe we didn't have 15 years ago, I think, in terms of our position in society. And it's due to different things. The first thing is really the overwhelming this kind of wave of new museology that has really taken over the way we think about museums and exhibition. And this displacement from object-centered exhibition and object-centered collection towards an audience-centered collection and way of thinking about our objects. And also a transparency in the processes. So the new museology has changed the way in which we're thinking about what we do. Another thing that has kind of really changed the museum field and the library field also is the development of participatory practices in throughout the last, I would say, 10, 15 years. 10, 15 years ago, there was no expectation of us working with communities. Today, it's kind of like something that's one of the first questions the founders ask you. So, what are you doing with your communities? Sorry? Don't hesitate to talk back. It's quite nice to, I don't mind. So it ranges from consultation all the way to co-creation, and we can talk about it a little bit more. I think it's something that now we need to think about. Then matters of representation, of inclusivity, same thing. 15, 20 years ago, they were not really on the agenda. Today, they are very much on the agenda in terms of the representation and inclusivity of collection, in exhibition, the polyvocality of cultural institutions. They are now a given compared to the traditional authoritative voice of what we used to have. The problem is that this is also put in question right now in a lot of the countries where people are working. And it's gradually kind of being, putting us in a position that's a really difficult position where ideologically we might want to be doing things that are representative and inclusive, but politically we don't necessarily have the backup of the funders or of the states that we're working for. You can say I've been chatting with my American colleagues lately. So same thing with the problem of democratization of culture. It's been a vague political aim. I think you find it in most of the European texts. But that creates very practical issues. We were talking about the non-visitors earlier, and it creates a lot of challenges for the institution. So what you see here is a really complex context that books and library exhibition exist in. And there's really, as I said, more and more of a conflictual world that we're working in, where our exhibitions end up having to reconcile institutional, individual, national, international goals and values and priorities, and they don't necessarily align. So I think it's becoming more and more important that we understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and in what way we intend to do it. So the direction needs to come from you guys. It cannot be, we cannot be expecting anymore directions coming from above or from different areas of the world. So, on this light note, let's start talking about what it is that we do. And I would like us to talk a little bit about the interdisciplinary nature of book exhibition. So I would like you to take a minute to think about what you exhibit when you're doing a book or a library exhibition. And I would like you to talk with your neighbor and come up with at least 2 or 3 things. What it is that you're exhibiting when you're doing a book exhibition. I wish I could take a photo of all the looks right now, because that's exactly how it feels. Come on.
I will go for ideas, actually, because all that what is printed, let's say the language which we use, the printing itself, there are a lot of messages coming out from each of those exhibitions, of course.
Yeah, ideas. Yeah, what else do we have? Talk amongst each other, it's more comfortable. Then once you have a good one, you can bring it back to the front. All right, that's a lot already. I can hear by the level of sound that we have a lot. Good. So now can we bring back to the front? What was your best kind of formulation? What are we exhibiting? Oh, now you cannot pretend that you didn't talk. I've heard you. You see, that's a teacher's trick. So, tell me. Are you really going to have me point at people? Thank you, Vanessa.
Books, but also other things in combination with other.
Books and stuff, yeah.
Other objects.
And other objects, yeah.
Not just a book, but a page of a book.
A page of a book, a book.
The book closed, open, just one page.
The bindings, yeah.
Yeah, and other objects.
Books and other.
And on the topic of the exhibition.
It does. Well done. So we go back to the ideas. What else did you have? Yeah, Susan.
Materiality,
Mm-hmm.
everything that's gone into the making of the object.
The making of the object. What else? Yeah.
The objects that put the context of the history of the book, so maybe the context.
Yeah, context, the history of the book, the kind of life, the author, that's another kind of thing. Yeah. What else are we exhibiting? Come on, there's got to be more. Yes.
We talked about people as well, so the author, but also who has owned the book, read the book, and over time, who is in the book.
Yeah.
The subject, and then the visitor bringing their own.
That's a lot of people. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, the people. What else?
So the subject matter of the book, what is trying, the idea is what the story is trying to tell, and then think about how you can make audience or visitors interact with the idea or the concept.
Yeah, so ideas, concept, but also narratives and stories. Yeah, I see you're kind of, so the meat of the book, yeah? What else do we have?
I think here in National Library is the best book exhibition what I even see. So you, every one of you could go.
There you go, guys. Take the compliment. That's a nice one.
It is, even for kids, come here with. I come here with my kids, with friends, and with my guests in the museum, and it's even the best exhibition about books. All what are mentioned here is in this exhibition. Materials, narratives, books, pages, interactivity, so you can feel, smell, see. What else? Go and see. But I'm not working in National Library, so I just like audience. I am one who are excited of it. So.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. And I like that you mentioned the interactivity part and the engagement part. So, as all good teacher, I have the answer kind of stuff, but not really, because there's a lot of things that you have said here that are not on this slide. When I try to kind of put my head around it, I usually try to distinguish between two things. When we use the book as a document, so to illustrate something else, and when we use the book as a monument, that's almost like an artwork, as a kind of a person in itself, if you want. And that's where I kind of went, that's when I started kind of like, okay, the book as witness of time, as author's production, as narrative, as character. So that's more to do with the book as a document. And the things that are more about experience of reading, object, visuality of the book, materiality of the book. And I think a lot of what you were saying kind of falls either in one of those or in between those. And I think that that's part of the complexity of what we do when we're exhibiting books, because we're not just exhibiting art. I think that that's very true, what we said earlier. And I think you're exhibiting a relationship between an audience, past and present, and an object. And I think that that's where it becomes really something that demands an interdisciplinarity. And that's also, I think, from my perspective as an art historian, a literature historian, and a museologist, that's when it becomes obvious that, to me, those exhibitions are inherently, deeply interdisciplinary. So then we, of course, have to ask ourselves why we exhibit. And often what you hear is things about education, research, entertainment, communication, engagement. So the kind of standard things that you see up there are the kind of standard things that we demand from us. But when we're actually working on activating. And we can be activating all kinds of different things. We can be trying to activate the book as an object. We can try to activate the narrative. We can try and activate the audience with those interactives. Or we can try and activate both that relationship between both the audience and the book. So I think instead of thinking in those kind of very normative kind of boxes of education, research, etc., I think it's more helpful for us to think about the activation and who or what we want to activate in an exhibition, because it gives you a different perspective on your material, and it allows you to go and dip into things that maybe look more like education or maybe look like more entertainment, but eventually they're doing something in terms of the activation. And Susanna and I will talk more about a little experiment we've done. And it looks a lot like entertainment, but it's not. So, so I think it's an important part. So where we arrive to is that, because those exhibitions are so interdisciplinary, what we see often in those exhibitions is that they're not a one-man show. They're often a negotiation of expertises. And I'm sure you all have examples. We just did an experiment as we were discussing, and I think we had like a conservator, a PhD working with smell, a museologist, a curator and historian of books, an audience expert, and I'm probably forgetting someone. And everybody had their voice in. And some of the best kind of audience outreach idea actually came from the conservator. So I think that there is also this kind of exchange, because we think of the book in different ways, that kind of brings together those different expertise. All right, am I going for time? Oh, perfectly on time. Well done, Emilie. So I'm a terrible over speaker, so I've been really kind of trying hard not to go over, guys. So now I would like to focus on the audience effect, and I would like to ask you, what do you see here? Same thing, talk with your neighbor. What do you see? Suzanne recognizes the place. So, what do we see? Tell me. You guys see a lot over there. I want to hear what they're saying. But they're not seeing me anymore. They're so engrossed. What do you see?
We were talking that they are looking at something, but they are not like very interactive. Maybe in this the second one picture there's something.
Yeah. That's one of the installed. I actually hesitated to put it in because that's not a standard one. Like there's someone is touching a book. No.
And also we discussed there was a problem that nobody wanted to be interactive. For example, in Latvia we are more like introverts, but now there is like sometimes opposite problem when you. I wouldn't say that's a problem, that's just a challenge how to clearly show where you should touch and where you shouldn't.
Yes,
because there are some examples from other museums where they put something like in where people were touching when it wasn't mentioned. So
yes, we'll discuss that. The problem of if you break this kind of if you break the museum behavior and create interactive behavior, you need to be ready for misbehavior. That's just goes hand in hand. So I think that's something that to talk about. But yes, a lot of hands in pockets, right? Trying to not touch. A lot of behind backs and stuff like that. It's really interesting, actually. What else do you see? Vanessa, I can see you seeing something.
Yeah, they all are.
Yes, a lot of sore back and necks. They're all leaning forwards.
Yeah, and a lot of leaning forward to sort of engage with
exactly.
What do I see, and you have to come closer.
Exactly. So a lot of close looking and a lot of kind of engagement. Actually, I see a lot of engagement here. As when I do the ethnographic research, that's the kind of documents that we're looking at. So I see a lot of engagement. I see a lot of fascination. I see also sociability here. You can see that there is a talking together. There's a being together that is done in a certain way. What else do you see? Yeah.
So we talked. You mentioned about sociability. So we talked a little bit about the arrangement of the people. We thought that, for example, in the third picture they don't seem as though they're there together, but in the fourth picture on the right they do. So the combination, if you like, or groups of people that are coming are very different.
Yeah, and the spacing is really interesting. This kind of some of them there's a closeness, like a familiar closeness, and the others there's kind of like this respectful distances. So that negotiation of the distances also is really interesting for us, I think. What else do you see in terms of engagement? We're not allowed to show faces, so I cannot show you faces. But we can only observe and draw them. What else? Does that reflect more or less what you see in your own institution, or is that very different from what you have in your institution?
I wanted to add that it looks like there's a lot of light over there. One of the complaints that we always get is it's too dark in here.
Actually, I cheated. I actually made the pictures lighter because I couldn't see anything. So sorry, that's like, yeah, but well spotted. But yeah, indeed, you have this kind of almost muted kind of tone. We were discussing about the way in which people behave in book exhibition often reflects like church behavior, where people speak really softly, etc. You'll very see someone barge in there, running and speaking really loud. It's quite rare behavior. So it's really interesting, this kind of almost relic-like thing that happens to book. But I think it also is linked to the glass coffin, but we can talk about it a bit later. So what I see is a lot of engagement, sociability, fascination, a lot of emotion. There's a lot of sore necks. There's a lot of engagements there that is happening. So it's really interesting because it's when you're thinking about the effect on the audience, it's quite difficult to go from that to an actual audience engagement kind of qualifier or quantifier. So that you probably all know. It's one of the most used internationally at the moment. That's what most evaluation forms are based on. It's the GLO, or as my students like to call it, the JLO. But basically, they have helped cultural institutions move away from quantitative and simplistic measures, think visitor number, and they've helped them understand and communicate their impact in a more precise manner. So I'm not going to retrace now the work done by Professor Hooper Greenhill and her team, but what you can see that they really are focusing on the outcome and on the impact on the learner. It's based on constructivist learning theory, and it's really all the research took place in the early 2000s. So it's when you're looking at those, I think you can see that they are broad and that they do not set standards. So for example, if you have knowledge and understanding, they're not trying to measure, it's not school, right? They're not trying to give you a grade. They just want people to have acquired some knowledge. So they're rather base for discussion, and they're quite flexible and diverse, because if you're talking about attitudes and values, or if you're talking about skills or enjoyment, you're talking about very different kind of things. It's very much based on evidence-based policy, which always is an important, I think, part of the work we do. And it's been rolled out in a variety of environments. And it's become the standard basis for most evaluation forms. And it's something that I think, as a tool, is a very valid tool. So now that I've said all the good that I think about it, I'm going to tell you all the bad that I think about it. Because I think it has a problem. It has limitations. And it has the limitations of its advantages. Because it focuses not on learning processes, but on outcome, it actually misses parts of the story. And actually, as curators and as carer of collections, this process for us is as important as the outcome. Okay, great that people learned a new skill, but actually that process of them learning is what creates that connection with the book, right? So I think that the process is actually is really important. It also doesn't take into account a lot of the current developments in the way we understand what museums do. So I'm going to kind of go through the main changes that have happened since the early 2000s that I think we need to think about when we're thinking about audience effect. The first one is our shift in understanding of what learning in a museum is. I think for a really long time, cognitive knowledge is what people were expecting what learning means. But what we see today is that learning in museum actually is a lot more than the date and the author, right? it's a lot to do with affective learning. And affective learning is really important when it comes to building heritage or sense of heritage in the audience. So that's actually a part of learning, knowing what is important, what is significant culturally, learning to care for objects, time periods, etc., histories. That becomes an important part of what we do. Psychomotor learning is becoming really part also of what people are doing in museums and in especially with library collections, learning how to treat the book, how to touch it, how to move around. It's not just anymore about not bumping into cases, which has happened, but it is still part of the psychomotor learning. And you have then the social learning, which is not only a learning of, again, values that we share and that we kind of carry together, but also learning how other people relate to the object and being able to voice it and being able to kind of put words on different things. So this kind of graph is based on Folk and Dirkin and on my own work. And if you want references, I can give you whole bibliographies afterward. Just ask, don't hesitate. I have plenty of readings. So this kind of idea of what we learn in museum, which is knowledge but also skills, I think is an important kind of combination. And something that has also changed again, since the early 2000s. Another thing that has changed is that we have an expanded understanding of knowledge. So this is a little bit a lot, so I'm not sure if we have time to talk through all of this, but I just wanted to show you a couple of key things. So there is this kind of that's based on the work of Gottschalk Mazuz, which I really like because he really takes this dynamic and quite holistic understanding of knowledge. He sees knowledge as having a practical aspect, as being person-bound or not. So, for example, it can be a personalized or represented knowledge, and they can coexist and are not dependent. So, for example, I know about Monet's water lilies from books and things like that, but I also have an intimate knowledge of Monet's water lilies because my parents used to drop me at the orangerie because I was, terrible on Saturday afternoons, and they would just drop me there and go away. So, so it became my roaming garden, right? So there's this kind of different knowledge that I have of the water lilies. For example, I know they change color quite quickly depending on the weather because that's that physical knowledge that I have from being there, right? So there's a knowledge that's person-bound and there's a knowledge that's not. Knowledge has normative structure. A lot of my knowledge about Monet is actually structured by my art history degree. So it's internally networked. It's linked to existing knowledge that I have, other paintings of Monet, and externally networked with kind of, the 1874 Impressionist exhibition. So it's dynamic, so it changes all the time. There's new things that are being discovered all the time. And most importantly for us, it has an institutional context. The same exhibition in a library, in an art museum, or in a mall will have a completely different landing and way of being interpreted. So I think that that's also something that for us is important to think about. So another thing that has changed is our role curating such model. And this is Heinz's model of educational theory, and it combines learning theory and knowledge theory. And it basically has those two axes. One that assume the theory of knowledge, so that knowledge exists outside of the learner, so that's what you have all the way over there. And at the bottom, that all knowledge is constructed by the learner. And then it crosses the theory of learning with this kind of, that's what we do at university. We incrementally fill people with knowledge. And that's what we should do at university, where people construct their own knowledge. I love my little IKEA man. Still every time. But what it means is that then we're going to have different exhibition strategies. So, for example, if I think that the knowledge exists outside the learner and it's incrementally added bit by bit, then I need to do a didactic expository exhibition. I need to do something that is structured, that has very extensive labels, where everything is very organized, right? So that's up here. If I decide, on the contrary, that the learner constructs their knowledge and that the knowledge is like personal, that all knowledge is kind of personally constructed, then I'm going to have to go to constructivist exhibition kind of strategies. And there, I'm just putting objects there for people to actually build their own knowledge. I'm giving them hints, little bits and pieces, things that to help them build their own interpretation of the work. So very different exhibitions there, right? And that is very much institution-based. So different institutions have different habits, and they tend to do the same thing over and over again. What's also interesting is that nothing prevents you from combining stuff, just saying. You can actually do several things. But I think that, and there's nothing wrong with any of these. The only thing is that it changes the way in which the audience receive it. If you're doing a didactic expository exhibition, you're going to create in the audience a school-like environment. So there will be right and wrong answers. There will be things that you actually want them to take out. I could have a quiz at the end of my exhibition, basically, right? If I'm creating a constructivist, then as a curator, you cannot have expectations that people will go away with exactly what you wanted them to take away, because they are constructing their own knowledge, right? So there's very different kind of outputs and attitudes that are created in the audience, and different processes of engagement that are created if we are taking the different, those different elements. How am I going on time? Still perfectly on time. So proud. So we're getting in the meat of the subject. So, because I think those kind of three, so I explained to you how I chose those three kind of types of curation. Basically, I have the very huge luck of working with students, which means that I see how they change and how their interests change and how society as a whole kind of shifts. So I'm a spy for you. I can tell you what they're thinking. But also, that means that I have to keep up with the literature all the time. And at the moment, these are the three main things that are kind of being discussed by academics and by students. So the first one is affective curation, and I'll get into an example and detail it. But basically, what you're trying to do when you're doing affective curation, you're trying to create value and attachment. You're building heritage, you're building care, you're building empathy, you're building identity, right? And it's important to be aware when you're doing that, because sometimes what we've seen is that can be also very much accidental, where, people go, oh my God, people are crying in my exhibition, why is that? So better that you know why people are crying in the exhibition. So it's important to understand that the processes for this. Participatory curation does something else. It builds ownership and representation. This is all kind of co-creation of knowledge happens. You have an acknowledgement of embodied and situated knowledge. It creates agency in the audience. And it is especially good for anything to do with social learning and creating communities of practice. Quite a different approach, quite different results, right? Transformative curation, so it's based on transformative learning, and it's looking at the exhibition as an agent of change. It's looking at the exhibition as having the potential to shift someone's position, shift someone's understanding of a period, of a book, etc. And the thing is that when you do that, when you do those transformative work, you're actually shifting the identity of your audience. So that's something that needs to be done carefully, and it needs to be done with intention. And in terms of its shape, it can be immersive, and it can be a way to practice resolution, but I'll get more into details there. But I wanted to show you that those three curatorial strategies actually have extremely different results and extremely different kind of background. So what does that look like? Let's talk about affective curation. You might recognize Medieval Women in Their Own Words, that was open at the British Library in London not so long ago. I was very impressed, actually, by this exhibition, because I think in terms of affective curation, it did a great job. So just a bit more kind of background. There's been what's been called an affective turn that emphasizes that emotions are intrinsically linked to the world making and our form of cultural politics. So the idea with this is that emotions are not just a private reaction, but they are central to the negotiation and contestation of how we relate to our own world, right? And to others. So Ahmed's work really is one that has stimulated enormously the way we understand that affect is socially, culturally, discursively, and politically mediated. So basically what Sarah Ahmed says is that emotions are not simply residing in an individual, but that they circulate between an individual and an object. And that people are becoming attached to them through a process that I really like that she calls stickiness. And that stickiness can be enhanced, or it can be removed, it can be worked on. But what it creates is an emotional engagement in the museum that's not only personal, but that's also shaped by social and material configuration. So for Ahmed, emotions are a way that we respond to objects and others, and that's where the boundaries between the I, the we, and the other kind of is negotiated. And for Ahmed, the emotions serve to situate the object in relation to their world and orient them towards, with varying degrees of urgency, sympathy, and aversion. But this orientation is fundamental. And actually, this is what affective curation is. It's that orientation of the stickiness. So I'll give you another quick example that I was just thinking about. More traumatized students. So we have a course on exhibiting a colonial collection in a post-colonial world. And my first tutorial with my students, they're bachelor poor students. Anyway, they really kind of come here with all their enthusiasm and naivety, and it's great to see them there. And we always do that first exercise on coffee. So, because there's a lot of objects in Dutch collection that are related to coffee, trade, and colonial history. And I always split the class in half, and they have the same objects, but one have a little bowl with some kind of coffee beans that they can smell, and a label that's all about how do they relate to coffee, and you know how they are kind of linking to it. The other group, the traumatized group, has a soundscape of a slave ship and a label about what the cultivation of coffee meant in terms of the slave trade at the time. And then I put them back together and ask them to discuss how they feel. And guess what? Group A and Group B don't feel the same way. And that's what affective curation is. That's really about making them feel. But you see how what I do, even small intervention in terms of curation, really changes the stickiness and the orientation of that emotional work. So Varuti has been kind of exploring that concept of affective curatorship, and if you're going to read her work, it's recently published in 2023. Same thing, I can give you the detailed references. And she says that affective curatorship reasserts and reinforces the uniqueness of museums, the power of museum objects, environments, architecture, storytelling, and performances to touch us emotionally over and over. And I think that and what she works on is that problem of intentionality, that orientation. And she's trying to think about the tools and the interpretive lenses that you can use to stimulate this. Another kind of tool that can be useful if you want to kind of dive into affective curation is what Laura Jane Smith calls registers of engagement. I don't necessarily agree with what she's saying. I think it's not perfect, but we keep talking about it, and I see her soon, we'll keep arguing about it. But I think it's a good starting point for a tool to start thinking about it. So she talks about embodiment, affect, emotion, cognition, memory, imagination, and playfulness. And out of these kind of modes of engagement, my problem is that I think that, for example, if you have imagination, of course, you have emotion and embodiment. Anyway, so I've been telling her they overlap. She needs to work better. But then those modes for her interact with the intensity, so how much of that you feel, valence, so whether they're positive, negative, or neutral, and whether they're progressive or conservative values. That's because, yeah, she lives in a very politically polarized world also, I think. So I think that that's a part of that. But she's kind of saying that basically this kind of register of engagement is shaping the heritage, is shaping the way the heritage is perceived. So in that exhibition, for example, who's seen that exhibition in the National Library? Yeah? Oh, just two of you. Oh, so tell us, what did you think?
You medieval women?
Yeah. And there you
Well, I
go.
was sitting next to the curator here, so I thought it was fabulous.
Oh, okay, we all have to say it's fabulous now. But what did it do?
Okay, I had an interesting experience because I went with my niece and my sister-in-law, one of whom is studying medieval theology, and the other one is an art therapist. So and then obviously I'm a medieval manuscripts person, so we all came with very different approaches. We had a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it, actually. I've spoken to Julian already about some practical questions about how the first section of any exhibition seems to create a huge traffic jam, and it would be really great, actually, to think in future about how we deal with that. But I think one of the things that struck me was how much people wanted to actually read the books. You know, lots of them were in Latin or medieval languages, in scripts that are not easy to read, but people were very, very committed in their experience to try and decipher what was on the page. Sorry, that's a rather baggy answer. But
No, it's not a baggy answer at all, because what's interesting is that I think the exhibition did a really good job at making people care.
Yes,
in all kinds of different ways. So through, for example, because you felt the presence of these women there, through the quotations, through the scenography, through all kinds of different ways, they were there. And I think that changes the way you relate to the book, because you're now, as you're saying, you're prompted. You want to know what they have to say, because you have, a quote or something, but you don't have. You want to dive in. You want to go further. How did you feel about it?
I was there with a colleague, and we also have at our library a museum with manuscripts and so on. And I was very happy to discover, because we always have in mind that it's very male-based, all this history. And I was very happy to discover that the women in that time also had a lot to tell, and they are reflected in books. And for me, it was also an eye-opener in a way that we, as KBR in our museum, are always looking at the nice pictures in our wonderful manuscripts that have very nice miniatures and so on. But there's still a lot of work to do on the stories that are in these books. And there, I engaged with. They told me what was in the book, and even if you can't read Latin or whatever, there were quotes that were, or there was text explaining what is this book about, and you could see some quotes there or discover where it was, and it makes it engaging, because you don't just look at the book, it's wonderful written or it has nice images, but you also know what's in there, the content was there.
Yeah, very good. You see, we were talking earlier about activating that relationship between the book and the audience, and I think that's affective curatorship is really efficient at this, because it makes you feel concerned, right? You are part of that discussion. You become, as an audience member, part of that discussion. So can I not go backwards? Oh, yes, I found the backwards button. There. So if you look back at what I was saying earlier, in terms of creating value and attachment, building heritage, care, building empathy and identity, those are really efficiently done with this affective curation. So, moving on, still on time. Yes, still on time. Yes. 3 minutes late. So participatory curation. I'm moving on to participatory curation because, again, that's something that does something quite different. And that's not really thought through that often when we start doing participatory curation, we start with an idea of an exhibition that we want to do, and that doesn't really work like that. That's kind of like if you're doing that, then we're doing contribution, right? We're consulting, so it's not exactly the same. So a colleague and I, Anna Elfers and I, did that nice scale of participatory practice in art exhibitions, which the students proceeded to destroy. So don't ask me what the plus and minus is. I'm still not talking to Gabrielle about this. No, that's not true. He actually forced me to think about why I had scaled them, because in the end all of them are valid and all of them are forms of participation. But I had scaled them instinctively on levels of agency that audiences have. So when I started unpacking that, Anna left the boat because she thought that's not her interest anymore. She's more into kind of audience events and marketing, so that she wasn't really into that. But I started developing, because when I started looking, there was just no definition of what agency means in the museum studies. So I developed that model where you have intention, action, and outcome. That's actually based on video game theory, because that's the only ones that were actually caring about the agency of players. And that you need all three in order to be at the top of the scale, if you want. If you're talking about co-creation of an artwork or an event, then there needs to be, right from the start, the audience is being taken on board. When you're doing, so you're really going from consultation to co-creation. Again, I've put them as a scale, but actually it's not a scale. All of them are valid. All of them are types of participation. They all have different impacts, though, because the way you treat people's agency is going to shift the way in which people engage with the material. There's also a real risk of empty ritual. And that's something where, you know, I'm sure you've all seen the post-it walls with those poor post-it flipping away and falling down and nobody really reading them. And so it becomes kind of a performance of participation, which is actually not participation. So I think that that's something to think about. I have a deep hate for the post-it wall because I really think that it's disrespectful in terms of the agency of the visitors. I really think that if either you're engaging in dialogue or you're not, but just, you know, having people shout at the clouds is not really communication. So what it does really well is that it works on matters of representation. It really helps with, if you're wanting, for example, to shift your gaze as an institution, that can be really useful. So, for example, I put there an exhibition I worked on with students, which was about rebel girls in illustrated books. So it was a very fun exhibition that, you know, we were just deciding with the students we wanted to do something about, you know, Pippi Longstocking and, you know, Matilda and all those kinds of girls that fed the children's imaginary through images. And we decided to expand the curation group to other students who would share their stories of reading those books and the impact that those stories had on their books. And we recorded all the different kinds of stories. So we ended up with lots of trouble because we had people from everywhere, and they started mentioning kind of characters we'd never heard of, some that were really obscure because it's an international university. So you had all of a sudden this kind of like weird character from, you know, 80s Germany, Eastern Germany or something, and you kind of like, where did you find this? And we kind of started having trouble just finding the books even. But in the end, the opening was really interesting because we ended up, so the students didn't want to have any books in cases because, you know, they were well taught. So we ended up having objects about those characters in the cases and then having the books for people to read there. So we kind of flipped it around. But yeah, it was really a challenge to kind of get into that problem of representation. And of course, not everybody felt represented. At that opening, I had a lot of people coming to me and saying, and what about that character? I'm just like, well, that didn't come up, so sorry. But so there's this kind of also responsibility that you take on in terms of representation when you're doing something like this. But what it meant was a co-creation of knowledge. There were a lot of tensions of authority, especially with the Allied Pearson. They were really game. They really let us play. But there's always this kind of tension. Like when we told them we wanted all of their cases, but we didn't want to put books in it, they were not impressed. So there is this really interesting kind of shift that happens there. But what happened is a lot of social learning, a lot of interpretive communities, and a definite sense of ownership, not only by our students, but by the participant students, and then by the student community at large, because it's kind of really spread. So in terms of the building, like, I'll go back now that I know where the back button is. In terms of building ownership, representation, co-creation of knowledge, acknowledgement of embodied and situated knowledge, less for this particular exhibition, in terms of creating agency, all of this, all those boxes are checked. And you see that it's projects that are often subject-based rather than book-based, but you could imagine them also to flip them around into something book-based. All right, let's jump into transformative curation. I will be quite brief about this because I think it's something that's still being developed, and I have actually not seen a properly transformative exhibition. So I think this is something for us to think about, looking to the future. So it's based on Jack Meziroff's transformative learning theory. And in his work, he looks at the learning process of people through the ideas that people can critically examine and revise their existing frame of reference, and that they can kind of change through the exhibition. Sincerely, this is something that at the moment we need badly, because we really want people to start thinking about their positioning and to be able at least to understand other people's positions. So that's also why I put it there, because I think in terms of our social role and in terms of our kind of political agency, this is a type of exhibition that can really change things. And so it was developed on by Jarvis, and I've put here Jarvis's scheme because I think that's the clearest way to explain learning, to explain transformative learning. And to Jarvis is a little bit different from Meziroff, because for Jarvis, really the transformative learning, it goes beyond the cognitive and really also into the emotional and social, etc. So, but basically, and corporeal, which is also an important thing. So for him, basically, I'll just take you through the scheme. The person takes the world life for granted. They have their own frames of reference. They have their beliefs. They have where they come from. In an exhibition, they have a sensation or a disjuncture. Something breaks something, right? And unfortunately, very often we stop there. We show them something they don't know. But if there is no opportunity for people to give meaning to this, to resolve this sensation, to resolve this break, then they are not there. You just have people that are very angry. That's it. So you need people to be able to resolve it and to practice it and go back and forth between that problem of practicing the resolution, giving meaning, and kind of having the disjuncture, so that they can then take it on board and move on to something else. So I'll show you something that didn't work. There was a slavery exhibition that shall remain unnamed, that an audience research was done, and what they found is that the people that came in with a certain belief came out with the exact same set of belief. That's something that doesn't work in terms of transformation, right? Because what they didn't do was that work of reframing, that work of actually giving people meaning and sensation. The labels were super clear. There was nothing wrong with the labels. There was nothing wrong with the exhibition itself. It's just that it failed to engage people in questioning what they had, right? So some people came out angry. Some people came out thinking like, well, this is exactly how I thought it was. And the actual transformative work was not done. So I think that that's where the sticky bit is for us now, is to try and figure out how this works. So we've been trying stuff, and I'm sure you've been trying stuff too. But so far what I found is the most effective is actually moving into the multisensory. because when you move into the multisensory, it's something that happens to people themselves rather than something that happens to someone else a long time ago. And so there's, and we'll talk a bit more about it in the next, in our experiment. But I think that there is, to be able to, so the two pictures, I'm cheating, these are pictures of my kid, so of course, you know, he's doing exactly what I want him to do. But, but there was in the experiment, and I'm going to butcher this, St. Cuthbert's gospel copy. And the kid clearly was excited looking at, you know, being able to hold the book and being able, etc. You know, there was something quite interesting about the materiality of it. But then he went to that exhibition that we were talking about. And so the original, and that was proper excitement. And all over Instagram and all over the seats and all over that. And you just think like, okay, you're really excited about that book now. And I think that kind of materiality is something that we can explore. Again, we need to do a lot more research about this, some proper, this is just anecdotal kind of stories, but I think that there is something there that we need to dive into. Also because it's not just one story about that experiment. And it's an experiment that lasted 3 days. And we had that guy that kind of kept coming back at us afterward at the cafe saying, you know, this was really interesting. I've been keeping thinking about those books. And you kind of think like, really? This was a week ago. You're still thinking about the books. So, but it does something in terms of the giving meaning and practicing resolution that I think might be a way forward. So, again, this one, I think, really has potential in terms of using the exhibition and as an agent of change, as really shifting people's identity. And I think the immersion is probably the place where we can really practice resolution. So that's why there's something about the multisensory that works there. But yeah, for that one, we need to do more research. Let's go. So anyway, I'm going to try and conclude a little bit. What's important to us is to think about how we can align audience impact with specific curatorial strategy. What I hope is that I've given you some tools, I've thrown a whole lot of stuff at you to try and help you think about what it is that you want from your audience, and so that you can start aligning the curatorial strategies with what you want from audience. It's very different to want people to take ownership of an exhibition or of a topic, and to want to have people to cry in the exhibition. That's not the same goal. So that's a different kind of registers of engagement. And I also wanted to maybe try to shift the attention that we have at the moment on outputs and shift it towards attention toward processes. As you've seen here, a lot of what we're looking at and what's important in terms of audience impact has to do with processes rather than outputs. Also because, for example, in transformative learning, the outputs, it takes a really long time for us to be able to catch the output. So I think it's less the output than the process that we should be focusing on. There are incredible issues of ethics that we really need to ask ourselves. So, and problems of control that we need to also ask ourselves. So that those are really things that are not going away. But one of the things I think that comes through from what we've done today is really this necessity of interdisciplinary collaboration. I don't think we can do that alone. We have to work together. So I'm really happy to have a whole new community of learners here that we can kind of learn from. And I'm very aware that there's lots of expertise in the room. So I'm looking forward to the discussions we're going to have in the next couple of days. Thank you very much.